You paint a picture in my mind. You wanna leave it all behind. In a world that's turning all the time, nothing could stop me longing for your eyes. I won't let it die. I can feel you when you're not around. When the night gets cold, I won't be alone. We won't be
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to those who were with us yesterday. I'm Mark Millam with Flight Safety Foundation and MC of our virtual BAS webinar. And this is session 3 out of 4 that we have planned. I'm sure you'd all like us to be together under one roof today, but given the circumstances, we're glad you're here with us in virtual BAS 2020. We're grateful for the number of people that have joined us throughout these sessions, and the involvement looks like we're on pace to match numbers from yesterday. Thanks for being with us today. And as we look at some of the practical steps for returning to operations and the safety challenges we will continue to have well beyond the crisis, we're so glad to have you participate in that. I'll give a little bit more advice a little bit later when we get back together to talk about how to engage with our speakers and moderators. But to get us started, once again, I introduce the Flight Safety Foundation's President and CEO, Dr. Hassan Shaheed. Hey, Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good morning. Greetings and welcome to Virtual BAS 2020, session number 3. A special greeting and welcome to Flight Safety Foundation members around the world. I hope everyone is safe and remains healthy as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Those that participated in day 1, welcome back. We had a significant turnout of participants yesterday, as Mark mentioned. 2 very engaging sessions, and thank you so much for the great feedback we're continuing to receive. Keep those coming. BAS, which is organized in partnership with NBAA, has been continuously held since 1955. And so we didn't really want to make history by completely canceling this year's event. And so with the great help of the Business Advisory Committee, we have transformed it to a virtual event as you are seeing it. The work of safety must continue, and we hope that you find it useful, and we do look forward to your continued feedback on this event. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers this morning. Let me introduce them. Michael Quiello, Industry Co-Chair of the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, Vice President of Safety, United Airlines, and Flight Safety Foundation Board Member and Board of Governors Member. And Ali Bahrami, Government Co-Chair of CAST and Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety at the FAA. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you with us this morning. Well, the Commercial Aviation Safety Team has had a long history over many decades and some significant safety analysis and recommendations and enhancements. And it seems like today, where we are more than ever before, this type of work is critical for us to work through the current crisis. So I thought, Michael, maybe I could start out with you to provide some perspectives for our audience on the work of CAST and the collaboration efforts with industry.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and good morning, Hassan, and good morning, Ali. I hope everybody's safe and well. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. For the first time in history of aviation, all segments of aviation are under enormous stress, and no segment is immune. That's both domestically here in the United States and internationally. That includes air traffic, the regulators, the airlines, the vendors, the service providers, the OEMs, and the list goes on and on and on. In years past, when one entity was severely challenged, here in the United States, the FAA and overseas, the regulators, can implement an enhanced oversight plan, and there are always adequate resources available to execute against that. Here in the United States, SMS was not available, and CAST size were not used in the enhanced oversight process, since enhanced oversight was only focused on one entity and never on the entire system. Luckily, today we have SMS, the data-driven approach that can be applied at the individual level, an oversight system that just wasn't available to us 10 years ago. Additionally, the entire system is now supported by an extremely strong CAST and a second generation of size program. So in this hyper-competitive industry, we all need to be hyper-vigilant. We need to be hyper-cooperative in sharing best practices and data. There has never been an industry collapse on the scale we are witnessing, and this is our collective challenge as we all work together.
Thank you, Michael. And on the next round, I might want to ask you to try to project a little bit on your audio so we can hear you more clearly. But no, those points that you mentioned, especially about collaboration, is so important, especially now. And Ali, from the government co-chair and the FAA co-chair perspective, could you talk to us a little bit about what you see?
Good morning, and thanks for the invite, Hassan. Michael did a great job of explaining what we are facing today. And I want to also put things in proper perspective. The relationships that we make over the years together, we built together, is going to help us during this crisis. Let me explain. I think when you look at how we embarked on the CAST initiative and reduce accidents and fatalities, we started way back in 1997. Throughout that time frame, we learned how to collaborate. We must collaborate. We understood that. We also recognized that we need to trust one another. Based on that, we also realized that we have to have data and information. And we trusted each other with that information. At the same time, we got smarter as time went on. And what we did was we put in place a series of tools, analytics, data sharing, ways to share information with the community that is now actually helping us to deal with the current crisis. This is not to say that this is easy. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that we've got the right tools, the right mentality, right approach to deal with the crisis that we're facing today. And I want to thank the entire community, the CAST team for stepping up and doing what they've been doing within the past month. It's just been incredible. And I got to tell you, it's exciting, it's energizing, and actually uplifting to see how we can come together during a crisis like this.
Thank you, Ali. And Michael, I do want to talk about what you pointed out about the data and the power of data. Given that now we are seeing reduced operations, I would imagine the ingest of that data is less than it was before. And could you talk to us about what impact might that have in terms of identifying risks, and in terms of our operations? Is that a issue, or how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so we use data constantly to look at predictive and proactive issues that are happening in the system. And so you would think that with reduced operations, things would kind of slow down, and that things would be a lot easier and there'd be less stress in the system. But Ali would concur with me that we're actually seeing things pop up that we never seen pop up before. For example, short taxis. Now, you push back from Chicago, and instead of having 20, 25 minutes to the hold short, you're out there in 3 or 4 minutes. And so what does that do for checklist discipline, cockpit discipline, misconfigured takeoffs, things such as that? The other thing we're seeing is, with the 60% of the fleet parked worldwide, here in the United States, United has a significant amount of aircraft parked. We're parking them on off-duty runways at our hubs and at our secondary airports like Madison, Wisconsin. And so now you have the issue of non-standard runway configurations that you may be used to, whether you're in the business side, the commercial side, the civilian side of aviation. You're going to see non-standard runway configurations, and that introduces a stress. And additionally, air traffic control, because there's less traffic, may give you a fielder's choice. That is, pick a runway and land. And so that means that you may see high rates of descent. And so all these things have unintended consequences when it comes to the safety of the system.
Thank you, Michael. And Ali, yesterday, the administrator mentioned in his remarks the work of CAST and the fact that CAST has come up with a set of risks that will be shared in the coming weeks. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As Michael mentioned, today, because of the significant reduction in operation, we're seeing different types of issues. And we don't have that much time to figure this out. We got to move right now. And what we did was we decided that it makes sense to have frequent CAST meetings. It makes sense to have frequent SIS executive board discussion, and actually ask that data analysis be done much quicker so that we see what's happening in the system. And what we wanted to do is to help the community by identifying those potential challenges that each one of us are going to be facing over the next several months and until we get back to some sort of a normal, which we're still trying to figure out what that would look like, frankly. And from our perspective, is trying to figure out what we need to focus today. So what Administrator Dixon was talking about is the work that under the leadership of the CAST, the executive committee, Michael and others, we are putting this together. We hope to be able to identify those challenges. And again, the entire globe, the entire world is dealing with this issue. And the more we share information, the better off we are from the safety perspective, and the quicker we could get back to normal. So that's what our plan, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Michael, on the restart, because I know you at United are dealing with this in terms of looking ahead. Is the work of CAST and the kinds of analysis and the risk you're identifying, could that be applied and used for restart, not just with current operations, but as we restart, could that inform how we restart and mitigate those risks?
Oh, absolutely. But let me just tag on to what Ali just said. So the CAST, the GMDAT had identified a series of risks, if you will, or issues that are out there. And so we take those issues and ingest them into our SMS. So the system is working. So you got all those issues that are out there. We ingest them into our SMS, and we look at internally, say at United Airlines, and say, is this something we're seeing with our data? And so it's a good collaboration to go back and forth. Now, to your question, Hassan, as to what it looks like, anytime you have a wind down, it's actually easier on the wind down because you just stop flying. Whether it was 9/11 or what happened recently in the last month, we just stopped flying and everything just remains in place. And we put airplanes in storage. Pilots remain trained on the airplanes they are. When you start unwinding all of that, and then you'll get to a steady state.
when you start unwinding all of that, now you've got the risk into the system. I have to retrain pilots. I got to get people recalibrated. The operations, they're used to a slower tempo. Now it's an up-tempo operation. And those are the things that CAST and the science will help us identify the risks that are out there. So the restart, I think, is more challenging than the wind down. And I've been through it a couple of times. And I always tell you that the restart has more challenges in it than the wind down.
Hassan, if I may add, I think it's we are very fortunate to have SMS in place. Frankly,
Right.
if we did not have SMS in place, the situation would have been by far much more challenging than we have it today. Today, we are relying on a good work of those organizations that they have the SMS. We have matured the process to the point that they exactly know what they need to be doing and how they need to face those issues. Let me point out with respect to the wind up the work. As you know, we have been granting all sort of relief to the industry over the past month or so. And from our perspective, trying to get back to normal and get back to the normal oversight process, it's going to be challenging even from the agency perspective. And my hope is to be able to work with the community when we get to that stage, use their own great processes to help us with that aspect as well. So everybody wins in this process. And if there is any time to take a look at the business aspect and the cost benefit of SMS, I would say after this would be a good idea to take a look at to see how we leveraged it and how it really helped us.
Very true. Ali, let me follow up on the restart. As we know, there is significant international harmonization part of the restart. What are the things that your organization is doing in terms of reaching out or internationally and coordinating activities as we begin the restart?
You know, I think that's a great question, Hassan. Let me point out that there are certain areas that already ICAO is taking the lead. For example, there's been numerous conversation with folks at ICAO and in numerous countries about medical certificates, acceptability of that, and also the extension of the pilot licensing and those kinds of issues. So we are having those dialogues and discussions. But I think where we are today, it's up to us as the authorities to think globally in this environment. And I think we should be looking for opportunities where we could take advantage of those relationships that we have with those authorities, EASA or Canadians or our colleagues in Brazil and other places, and to be able to share that information. And this is what we plan on doing. Administrator Dixon has put a lot of emphasis on that. He's made it very clear that the good work of CAST and the work that we're doing with the community should be used in that fashion. And we hope to be able to do that. And obviously, we look forward to work with those authorities that want to work with us closer.
That's great to hear that of that sharing internationally of that very important information. Right. Michael, as a global network operation, you're working probably 24/7 to determine how you're going to do the restart internationally. What are some of the considerations you all are looking at, especially when it comes to protecting the crew and passengers, face masks, hygiene, things like that?
So it's an interesting question because we fly to 8 different countries, I believe it is, and each country has different procedures. But the issue is we also overfly a lot of countries. On our way down to South Africa, for example, we overfly the entire continent, most of Africa. And so if you had to put an airplane down someplace, what would you do? It's interesting flying our 180 ETOLs over the North Atlantic. When Iceland shut down their country to diversions, those are 2 diversion fields, Reykjavik and Keflavik, that we couldn't use anymore. And so you have to redo all your procedures, and that's not business as usual. That's not business as normal. And so those are the things that our network ops center has to be in tune with, in addition to the arrival issues that when you arrive into a country, what are their protocols that they need to do, and how does that affect the fatigue risk management system, FRMS? That is we're expecting the crew to remain, unencumbered for an X amount of hours, and all of a sudden it's taking them 3 hours to get through customs and immigration, and then they got to get to the airport earlier. And how does that all affect that? So it's a very complicated, complex problem that we have going forward. It's not going to be easy because the whole world is not harmonized yet, and the harmonization, I would think, to Ali's point, is going to take a while to everybody to this dies down, and we're back to the new normal, whatever that new normal is. So it's a very complex problem.
Right. Both of you have talked about collaboration. Ali, just from your perspective, the community, they're reducing operations, they're reducing some of their workforce, some of the key people. What are you seeing in terms of collaboration? Is this having an impact on collaboration, or is that still continuing, in CAS, for example, or other forums? What are you seeing?
So again, excellent question. I think that there is no question that a number of companies have reduced their operations, even in manufacturing side. When you take a look at it, some production reduction, in some cases a stoppage for some time. I think what's really important, though, the community within CAS is so dedicated and so focused that all we have to do is point out the importance and the benefit of what we are doing here, and they all show up. And that's what I said, is energizing and invigorating just to see that level of energy. Having said that, though, I think that we have seen cases where some of the people who used to be at our meetings are now either on temporary furlough or something. And frankly, there is some impact, especially when it comes to some of our rulemaking effort, some of our ARCs activities. Those people are not there, or at least they won't be there for a short period of time. So again, what we try to do is recognize the importance of taking action at this time, and find mitigation and adapt to changing environment. And that is something that is going to be with us, and will continue to change, as you all know.
Well, thank you. I know you both are very busy this morning with your next appointments, but as we finish up this segment, let me just ask for any final remarks for our audience, or any perspectives that you wanted to provide. Michael?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, thank you to everybody out there for what they're doing in this crisis. But I really need to thank our colleagues at the FAA. This data-driven approach to do risk mitigation, to do risk analysis, has been accepted not only at the highest levels, up at Ali's and Administrator Dixon's level, and Dan Elwell, but throughout the entire organization, down to the CMO and the principals, that they're all on board with this data-driven approach, understanding what the risk is and mitigating it against the crisis. And it's been refreshing to be able to work with a team like that, because we're all pushing this rock up the hill the same way. So thank you to everybody in the community, but my thanks to my colleague Ali and his team. They've been doing a fantastic job, and I can only imagine. I just see it from the United perspective at times. I see it from the CAS, but I can't imagine every airline 90 certificates petitioning the FAA for certain relief.
Understood. Ali, any other final remarks, observations?
I guess the only thing I point out that it's very clear that when you're in the business of safety, and when you are heavily interdependent on one another, collaboration is keyword. Talking to each other, letting us know what the issues are, and having some empathy toward the issues that your partners are experiencing is important. And I think as long as we keep these goals in mind and recognize that the business of safety really is always there. There's always need for us to work together. As long as we keep that together, I think we're in good shape. We'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. I know you're very, very busy, and I really do appreciate making time to participate this morning. Very, very informative, and the themes that you talked about are the themes that we've been discussing over the past couple of days. And so they're recurring themes, and so it's encouraging to hear that from you as well. So thank you very much, and I wish you a great day.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So long. Well, Mark, can you join me on our virtual stage, and let's proceed to the
Certainly.
segment. Good to see you, Mark.
Yep, that was very good. In today's event, we're going to try something just a little different. We know that when it comes to networking within any of our events, but even in BAS, it's so important. And with a virtual event, we've wished there was a way that we could do and provide more networking features. So one of the features we're trying in this session only is to open up the audience view of the virtual space we're sharing together. So for this session, all of the audience can view all other audience members. We're hoping that that provides a chance for you to connect later, share your experiences with anyone you notice is at today's event, and we'll see what happens in terms of the feedback. In today's event, it is also important to hear from the audience, and when it comes to instructions on that, I just have a few brief points to cover. As we go through the session, we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions and comments using the question box in your control panel. When we get to that part of each session, we'll use some of these questions that we received, and we'll get some responses from our speakers. We'll monitor the chat activity and reply as we're able to help you out if you're having some technical problems. We noticed some comments that were coming in a little bit about audio, and we are trying to adjust that as much as we can as we go along. There's always a chance that as you experience something that you're not the only one needing help. So we appreciate that feedback. When we conduct polls, if you've been involved in our previous events, you'll know about this special link that helps you participate in a poll. You can use a mobile device or separate web browser, and instant results will be displayed on the webinar screen. So take note of that URL, pollev.com/majorwins156. You can go to that right now, and I'll do a couple of sample polls so that you get a sense of maybe some of the other perceptions, other experience level and activities from folks that are in this session with you together. The first one we ran yesterday, and we got some interesting results. We'd like to try to run it again. We added a couple of categories of frontline staff that we think we'd like to know more about, but go ahead and give your responses in terms of whether you're a pilot, mechanic, flight attendant, ground agent, air traffic controller, dispatcher, inspector, or auditor. And it looks like people have taken to this rather quickly. That's great. Maybe some of you have already participated in previous events. I'll hold it open just a little bit longer. We do have a lot of pilots again with us today. That's great, because I think that you'll find this session very useful for that. And as this sort of stabilizes, we'll close the poll, lock it, and we'll move on. I'll try another poll here. We're going to be talking a little bit with folks that maybe have participated as a member of a safety regional roundtable. Why don't you let us know if you are a member or whether or not you might be interested in becoming a regional roundtable member. And just by the way, this poll is not confidential. We will be using some of the names to help get you in contact with a safety roundtable if you so desire. And then if any of you do not want to participate in this poll, that's certainly up to you. But we would like to be able to be the organization that helps connect these folks with roundtables where they're interested. Interesting, great. Well, thank you for your responses on that one. And one last poll we might want to try here is when it comes to the safety issues that you really might have, you know, some experience with or feel like you're dealing with within your organization. When it comes to business aviation, this is the NBAA top safety issues, and it comes from their site. You can make adjustments yourself in terms of ranking these, and then once you've slid them into a different position, you can submit your response. So we'd love to see, how this group here might rank these. Just remember, once you've submitted your results, it might be taking a little bit more steps to try to change that, but you slide those things up and down on your screen, and then once you're satisfied with how you think the ranking looks, then you hit submit. So thank you as well for this. This one's a little bit more complicated, but it's also very interesting to see different perspectives. Well, I think we've tackled everything in terms of polling today. I appreciate your responses, and I'd like to then begin or go back to what our next session is about, and welcome Lisa Sassy as our Business Advisory Chair to join me.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning, Lisa. How are you?
Good morning. Wonderful. Thank you. And you?
Excellent. Great day yesterday, Lisa, with the speakers and the discussion. And now hopefully you can maybe talk to us a little bit about your views, or summary of that a little bit. That'll be fantastic.
Great. Happy to do that. So just a reminder that the Flight Safety Foundation is recording all of the sessions, and it is on their YouTube stations. So you can pick up where you leave off today, as well as capture what happened yesterday. Just a real brief recap of what we discussed yesterday. The FAA administrator had a very specific address for us in regards to not only the current situation, but past interaction between the FAA and both corporate and commercial aviation. We had the honor of having Dana Schultz provide current protocols for accident investigations during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had an excellent medical panel with outstanding presentations from Dr. Quiello, who covered all aspects of psychological and medical, inclusive of prevention. Dr. Gary Toops, who is captured the FAA perspective on pilots' medicals during pandemic, as well as a very interesting conversation with medicine and natural supplements in regards to fatigue and sleep. I would encourage you to listen to both of those presentations. And then one of our BAC members who always presents germane dialogue and topics, and had a stimulating conversation yesterday in regards to our safety roadmap. So on behalf of the BAC, we welcome you again today, which will be another excellent day of presentations. Mark?
Go ahead. Yes, Lisa, go ahead. You can introduce Keith.
Okay, perfect. At this point, we have the privilege of discussing the past 6 years. We've hosted the joint safety roundtables, and they have become an integral part of BAS as a whole. We have just an interesting fact. We have 313 people on with us today, and that is phenomenal for a webinar. So the success that we've shown so far hopefully will continue. As Hassan and Mark indicated, it's difficult for us not to have a face-to-face meeting, but this is the best we can do in these times, and it's proving to be quite a great experience for us. So with the joint roundtables, we have collective focus on not only the safety roundtables perspectives, but how it interacts with aviation as a whole, and it's germane to everybody's responsibilities and performance. Keith is one of those individuals that typifies the responsibilities and success of being a part of the safety roundtables. Keith is a part of the Northeast, and so I do encourage the conversation for promotion of those roundtables if you are able to be a part of it. Keith has been flying for over 28 years and is currently an international captain for a Fortune 25 company. Keith has been involved with safety within several flight departments and is currently a member of the Business Advisory Committee. Keith has participated on the Northeast, as we indicated, as a representative for his company and coordinates the joint safety roundtable meetings held annually at the Business Aviation Safety Summit. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Keith Yato.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everybody to Savannah. It was great seeing a lot of familiar faces. And oh wait, that was my pre-COVID introduction. Sorry about that. Just want to start out when we realized that we were not going to be doing our BAS as normal. The Flight Safety Foundation had several hurdles to get over, which one of them was figuring out how we were going to continue BAS and what topics. And this topic came up pretty quickly among a lot of safety individuals, a lot of heads of safety departments, but how are we going to return to operations and how are we going to do it safely? I've approached this from an SMS point of view, as SMS is on all our minds, but how can we apply the SMS to the COVID-19? There's nothing that the FAA actually covers for Part 91 business operators, but they do have procedures and regulations for Part 121 operators covered under CFR 14 Part 5. And they break it down into 4 pillars of SMS. And just as a quick review, it's safety policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. What we're going to be concentrating on today is safety risk management, and that is broken down further into 5 parts. First part of safety risk management is system description, and the FAA describes it as a set of procedures to determine the need for and adequacy of new or revised risk controls based on the assessment of an acceptable risk. And that's what we're going to concentrate on today, is what is acceptable risk for each flight department. And that's going to vary between flight departments. There's not just one acceptable risk for everybody for things like this. The next part is identifying a hazard, and a hazard is, just for layman's terms, a condition that can cause an accident or injury. In this case, we've got a new hazard on our scopes, which is the COVID-19, the coronavirus. We've never had to deal with something like this before, but this is a new hazard that we're going to be dealing with now. Next part is analyze the risk, and basically that's what could happen if the risk isn't avoided. In this case, we run the risk of contracting the virus. Fourth is assessing the risk, and we have to look at the probability and severity, or basically how bad is the risk if it happens. I've got a basic risk assessment matrix. This is one of the ones that is provided by the FAA. Now, our goal would be to eliminate the risk, and the only way we can totally eliminate the risk would be to not fly the airplanes. Now, for those of us that want to keep the jobs that we have, that's not really an option. So now we have to look at the probability and severity. So for this exercise, I looked at a probability of about B, and on the severity side, a margin of about, or marginal for severity. If we follow those down on the matrix, it gives us a score of serious or risk level of serious. Now, different departments can change their scores. Some may think it's more serious or more severe, but for this exercise, we just went with a serious because it is. The last part is, how are we going to control the risk mitigation and safety tracking. And mitigation is just procedures that can be taken to decrease the risk exposure. What I've done is, through contacting and talking with different people, I've broken down the risk mitigation into different areas. But we basically, our goal is to mitigate to the very lowest acceptable level. And I've broken it down into, for pilot groups, flight attendants, maintenance, and dispatch. And then once we have this, our mitigation in place, there's got to be some way of tracking it. Each company is going to have different ways and methods, but there's ways that we can look at it. And for its effectiveness, you can use hazard identification tracking systems or HITS tracking. There's safety performance indicators, or different ways of tracking the effectiveness. And then when we find out what the effectiveness is, we need to be able to adjust the mitigation if needed, if it's working and how effective it is. For pilots, what I would recommend is, for each of these groups, discuss different situations or topics that have come to their attention, because we want to use each individual group's expertise. But we asked a lot of pilots, what did they come up with so far, or what are the questions that have been raised. One of the first ones was currency and proficiency. And there's things that are happening with the FAA that are given some release for currency. There's different options as far as training programs and doing virtual training, but there's a big difference between currency and proficiency. Just because you're current doesn't mean you're safe. You can be legal, but like for myself, I haven't been in the cockpit for 2 months. So jumping in the cockpit tomorrow, I would want to have some type of way to get my proficiency back up. And there's different ideas that are coming about from different groups. You can do flows and call outs at home. Some of the training providers are providing recurrent courses. And for the simulator portion, there's alternatives that are being offered, such as holding off to get back into the simulator, or private simulator sessions. But there's different things, and you can talk to your training providers about those. As far as scheduling, depending on the size of your operation, you can break up your crews into individual crews, say teams of 3 and 4 if you have a larger flight department. Smaller flight departments may not have the flexibility for stuff like that, but this way you could isolate different crews. If one crew goes out on a flight, give them the next time off, or if someone comes down sick on a crew, then you can also isolate them from other crew members. You can also schedule backup crews using kind of a team concept like this, if possible. Once again, it depends on the size of the flight department. And a lot of these ideas for these protocols will depend on the size of the flight department and how much risk mitigation do you want to put in, because the more mitigation you put in is also going to change the amount of operational effect it's going to have. Some flight departments are looking at identifying flights as short or long haul, and some of them have defined short as less than 4 hours and longer flights more than 4 hours. And there's different reasons for identifying that, which we'll get into shortly. From a health and safety point of view, one idea that was brought up is, instead of community headsets in the aircraft, go ahead and invest in individual headsets for the pilots. When you're on the road, avoid valet parking at the hotels if possible. Some of your larger cities and hotels don't give you an option, but that's just another layer of possible cross-contamination that we can avoid if possible. One topic that came up was crew rest in flight. When we start flying internationally and we start having long haul legs and we're going to be using the crew rest area, how are we going to handle the bedding? One idea that came up, and this came through some flight attendants, and the ideas I got feedback from them, is individual bedding. We can decontaminate and sanitize the areas of the crew rest in between the crew swaps. Some people were recommending that the crew member at the end of their rest period remove the bedding before exiting the crew rest area. But there's also going to be some challenges in that. Some flight departments, if you have several airplanes and you do multiple aircraft out on the road at once, you could have a need for 3 pilots and a flight attendant. That's 4 sets of bedding. You get 2 airplanes out with double legs, long legs. That starts adding up quick where you need 16 sets of bedding. So you may need to just kind of do a count as far as your supplies and can you even handle that right now. But that's something that in the future, when we start getting back to normal operations, we're gonna have to start dealing with. Safety on the flight deck. One of the protocols that people are coming up with is wiping down the cockpit during pre-flight, continue wiping down and sterilizing during the flight, have extra wipes and stuff like that. Wearing masks during the flight is one thing that's being recommended by not only a lot of pilots and flight crews as what they just want to do personally, but that's also coming down as a common practice now from a lot of our medical examiners and the scientists out there. However, there are some concerns that are being raised about this, and this is something that each individual flight department needs to talk about. What is their comfort level and what do they want to do? But concerns about having a mask on during a pressurization event. A lot of us have the theory, train as you fly, flying as you train. And as far as I know, including myself, I've never tried donning an oxygen mask and with a regular medical mask on prior. So it's just something to think about as we start figuring out what procedures and protocols we're going to start using. There's also varying views about the benefits of wearing a mask. The reality is we're in a steel test tube, and once you close the door, there's only so much social distancing you can do. But I personally feel that it's better to go a little more conservative. But there's a lot of things out there and ideas, and you got to just figure out with your flight departments what's the level of risk that you're willing to take or how far you want to mitigate stuff down to. Another recommendation that came up was increase your fuel reserves. Listening to yesterday's session, Steve talked about, ATC outages and stuff like that. And you never know if an ATC center is going to have a closure or something like that. So having higher than normal fuel reserves might not be a bad idea. Crew meals, when I was talking about long or short haul flights with less than 4 hours, more than 4 hours, some flight departments are looking at an option like that. I've gotten some feedback from different departments and medical professionals with recommendations on how to handle crew meals. And some are more casual, like we're going to wear a mask and then just take it off in the cockpit. But some are a little more conservative. And one idea that came up was to leave the cockpit, go to the crew rest area with your crew meal, sanitize the crew rest area, close the door, demask, eat your meal, and then basically do the reverse and put your mask back on prior to opening the door, re-sanitize the area before opening the door, and then opening the door and return back to the cockpit. It all depends on what your flight department wants to do is in reference to how far they want to mitigate. Some people will take a little less conservative and maybe just take the mask off, eat, and then maybe give 10-15 minutes before the other person or the other crew member decides to eat. One question that has come up, and this is another topic that is going to need to be discussed with the individual within your individual flight departments, but what are we going to do if someone becomes ill on the aircraft? When we're flying internationally, some countries require immediate ATC notification. When we do start flying internationally, we're going to have a lot more interaction within our service providers to find out what country restrictions or maybe what their individual states requirements are. But one suggestion is to know where the CDC quarantine centers are in your particular area. In the Northeast, JFK is one of them. I believe Miami is one. On the West Coast, I believe LA. But a lot of your service providers will have that information for us. And if you have someone ill, you may need to consult your medical service. A lot of us have different services we can contact in the air. Get a hold of someone as soon as possible. They might have you land at or direct you to land at one of the quarantine centers. Looking at flight attendants, once again, I would start talking to your flight attendant groups, see what's on their mind and use their expertise. For passenger interaction, we are always going to want to look at social distancing when possible. However, we've got a lot of different size airplanes out there, and some are larger and you can have better social distancing on some aircraft than others. Much higher concentration on hand washing, keep washing the hands, that's just common sense. Offering masks and gloves to the passenger, and there's been some different discussions. Some flight operations have discussed about having masks and gloves at each seat, or do they want to just have like a basket or bin that they can grab as they come on the aircraft and leave it up to the passenger. Once again, these are going to be policies that each individual flight department will have to decide what they want to do. Some operations are looking at the idea of limiting initially flights to only 4 passengers. Once again, these are all issues and questions that as a flight operation, you're going to have to figure out where you want to set your parameters. Food handling, a lot of questions came up about that, both domestically and overseas. Whether there was a need to wipe down the catering wouldn't hurt with the boxes, I don't think, and stuff like that. So some suggestions was sticking to box lunches for a while, but that raised another question because individual packing within the box lunches is another layer of possible contamination coming from the catering. However, I spoke to quite a few flight attendants, and they have spoken to some of the larger caterers, and they do have very high sanitation and cleaning procedures normally, but they've even ramped it up even higher right now. Some flight operators.
This is
Yes.
Mark.
Hey, Mark.
We can hear you really good. The screen looks good, but we seem to have lost your webcam. And I think there's many people in the audience that might want to see you as you were giving the presentation. So yeah, that'd be great.
Is it back?
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So getting back to water bottles, like some operations, including ours, used to have a procedure of putting water bottles at each seat. Now, some operations are looking and reassessing that to say, well, maybe not put bottles at each seat because you don't know what bottles people have been touching, and basically anything you put out, you may have to just throw out at the end of the flight. So now, instead of offering bottles at every seat, just wait and let the passengers ask for them, something like that. But once again, these are all procedures and ideas that you'll need to talk about as a flight operation. I mentioned The large catering companies have very sterile kitchens. Some of the flight attendants have been proactive in doing their research within the different catering companies. Some have even gone to the extent that every half an hour they're stopping their food production, re-wiping down the kitchens, changing masks, changing gloves. They're really taking this serious, which is good for us. There may need to be some higher research when we start flying internationally and stuff like that, but those are going to be things individually by the flight departments, what they're going to want to do. Some of the medical feedback we've been getting from different companies that have their own medical groups or scientists, they've been doing some studies on cafeteria dishes, and they've discovered that the dishes and flatware is fine if it's machine cleaned at high temperatures, machine washed. When it comes to using FBOs and stuff like that, some of the flight attendants are suggesting maybe not using the FBOs because at that point you're losing control. You don't know whether they're actually using a machine or if they've got someone hand washing them in the back, but they're recommending not hand washing on the aircraft because the water temperature just isn't high enough to really kill the bacteria and the germs and stuff. So from a flight attendant point of view, the question is, what if someone becomes ill on the aircraft in flight? And depending on the size of the aircraft, once again, isolate the passenger or crew member as best as possible. Smaller aircraft, you're only going to be able to isolate them so far. Inform the flight deck and maximize your crew resource management. Get everybody involved as quick as possible. Get a hold of your medical consultant as quick as possible for assistance and guidance. Depending on the situation, like I said earlier, they may direct you to a quarantine center, but they've got professionals that can help in those situations. If possible, limit the exposure depending on how serious the situation is. You may not be able to. Some crew members are looking at the idea of wearing a mask, but not necessarily gloves. But in this situation, you may want to glove up and put on extra protective layers if you can. For maintenance, start off with talking to your maintenance guys. See what they've come up with and use their experience. A lot of operations have their own private passenger lobbies. Some operations are choosing not to use the lobby at first. It's just one more layer that they have to clean, decontaminate. Some airports won't permit this, but a lot of maintenance guys are suggesting just letting the passengers come straight out to the aircraft to avoid the lobby. Some airports don't allow car access on the ramp at White Plains. They do, so we could use that as a protocol. But when you're on the road, you may not have that option at some of the different FBOs. With aircraft maintenance, some companies are looking at doing engine runs once a week and or every week or two, even taking the aircraft up, do some flights. You can kill two birds with one stone if you decide to take the aircraft up. You're not only running and operating the entire aircraft, which is always good from a maintenance point of view, but it also gives an opportunity for currency and just keeping that proficiency up. Some companies are looking at the ionized kits, which kills the circulating germs. Some of these are very, very expensive. I'm not sure how many companies are going to install them, but once again, that's just another option that is out there from a maintenance point of view on how to attack this new hazard that we have. There's different products out there for antimicrobials. Some of them last up to a year. The one that I am referencing here is that I've heard the most about is a Micro Shield 360. Some questions about that is that's a great another layer of protection. However, what kind of chemicals are we putting on that we're going to be sitting on and touching that it lasts up to a year? Once again, discussions for individual flight operations. From a scheduling point of view for maintenance, depending on the size of your flight operation, you can try to keep social distancing there and the least amount of people as possible. Depending on the size of the operation, maybe schedule 2-person crews, depending on what you can do. Smaller operations may not have that flexibility. When aircraft are coming back, one thing that some flight departments are looking at is, if possible, and the schedule may not always allow this, but let the aircraft sit for 72 hours. Supposedly the virus doesn't do well in longer times, and I know some operations have had a flight crew return. They will have their maintenance guys do a external walk around. Once the crew leaves the aircraft, close the aircraft up, let it sit, and don't even enter the aircraft. Now, if you have a flight the next day, obviously you can't do that. So maybe some higher protocols for sanitizing when you're first coming on the aircraft. Once again, these are just ideas to talk about and figure out where the individual operations want to set their risk levels. As far as passenger luggage, this was another big question. How are we going to handle that? You know, you're going to have a lot of passengers, even if you're not using your passenger lounge. We have no idea how our passengers are handling their luggage at home, the car transportations they use, and different things between their home and the aircraft. One idea that's been brought up is possibly wiping down the luggage once they take it out of the vehicle. Maybe wear extra gloves, or make sure you have gloves on and stuff like that, just so we're not cross-contaminating from the passengers to the crew and vice versa. From dispatch, talk to your dispatch groups. What have they come up with? One of the first things that was brought up was hotel or rental car protocols. Some operations have dispatch that they set up for the crews. Some smaller operations may not have a dispatch, and this may be things you're having to look at yourself, depending on the size of your flight department. One thing that's been suggested is stick to the major brands. A lot of your bigger brands on both rental cars and hotels do have good protocols as far as sanitation and how they've been handling the virus during this quarantine. Another thing that you may want to do is call any hotel or rental car agencies ahead of time and find out what is their sanitation protocols. For the hotels, they may have certain protocols for checking in. Some hotels, when you check in and you go to your room, they don't want you to even leave your room and only order room service. So do some extra research when you start getting the overnight flights. Some flight departments and operations are talking about only doing day trips and doing a lot more ferrying. That way the crews are not having to stay overnight if it's a multi-day trip or something like that. Once again, some operations might have the flexibility to do that. Not all operations will, but discussions for your operations. One idea that came through dispatch was travel kits for the crews for their rental cars. Give them some type of travel kit with sanitation wipes, antibacterial gel, extra masks, extra gloves, and stuff like that. These are things that as they get into the rental car or in the room, they can use to wipe down and just continue protecting themselves. Another layer of protection. As far as FBOs, some people have been doing some research, and a lot of FBOs have stopped using their crew cars, and they may not even be available anymore. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is FBOs are working with limited crew and people right now just because of the demand, and that's a lot more work for them. If a crew ends up using a rental car or a crew car, they have to clean it and sterilize it in between. But it's also a layer of liability that I think a lot of the flight FBOs are wanting to avoid. Many are using electronic methods to pay the bills, which is another way of mitigating the personal contact. If they allow this, definitely take advantage of that. Some FBOs are operating where a crew can come in and they don't even have to go into the passenger lobby. You can also coordinate ahead of time to see if cars are on the ramp. I'm wondering, and this is just me thinking out loud here, but I'm wondering if some of the airports might even lift their restrictions or loosen the restrictions for cars on the ramp. Some of your larger airports may not have that flexibility, but hopefully that's an idea that the airport can start talking about to help us out. When scheduling, some flight departments have talked about the idea of avoiding overnights initially. Once again, it depends on the operation, what the company is willing to do. I already touched on contacting the hotels for individual protocols. The topic of pre-trip risk assessment. Most flight departments, including ours, we have risk assessments for every single flight and leg. If you have a risk assessment form, take a look at the form. There may be some mitigation protocols that you can put right into your risk assessment form. Some companies are also considering doing a pre-flight awareness brief between the dispatch and the flight crews to look at additional risk. There's going to be things that dispatch may also have to look at, such as, when we're talking about risk assessment forms and stuff like that, where are you flying into? You could be coming from an area that hasn't had a high infection rate and then going to a hotspot like New York. That's going to be a higher risk than someone going from like Texas up to Bozeman, Montana, where there aren't a high number of infection rates. But these are all things to think about. On a general, all personnel, for personal health, one of the things that is being suggested is self-monitoring your temperature twice a day between the 24 to 48 hours prior to a flight, just to be aware of your own health. Isolate yourself from the public as much as possible. Obviously, don't quarantine yourself for 2 weeks, but a day or two, maybe just use some common sense and try to stay out of the public eye. Maybe take a more conservative approach. If you're not feeling 100%, contact your employer and staff sooner than later. If you have the flexibility of having multiple crews, you may want to swap out crew members or entire crews sooner than later. Bottom line is, SMS is all about lowering our risk to the lowest possible ability. What is going to be the acceptable level for each flight department is something that we're going to have to figure out. But use your SMS and your safety risk management to look at all these ideas. And bottom line is, we are in this together, and we're going to have to do our best to get back to normal operations. I don't believe that this is the new norm, but this is just some ideas that we can look at within our operations to get us started to the day when we do return to normal operations. So Lisa, I'll give it back to you and we can field some questions if need be.
Perfect, Keith. Thank you. I know that we probably have a lot of questions waiting, so just two that I'll start out with. You talked a little bit about in-flight medical. Certainly there are a number of providers, MedAir, AirCare, and others. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the coordination or protocols that your corporation has structured. Are you able to speak to that at all?
Well, you definitely started with an easy question right out of the gate. I mean, bottom line is, I think we're going to have to, that's a discussion definitely within the flight operations. Handling and talking with your medical providers as soon as possible anytime you have an in-flight medical emergency of any kind. The sooner the better, and they've got the resources to help coordinate to give you some feedback. I definitely don't want to say what is a good protocol or bad protocol. because different flight operations, if you got your CEO on board, you may not want to divert when you're over the Middle East or somewhere when they may just be not feeling well. It may not be corona. So, this is just such a touchy situation. And that's why I think as soon as you can get a hold of your medical provider, they've got the expertise and the experience to help give you guidance of whether they think it is serious and diversions and stuff like that. But bottom line is, when you're talking about those types of things,
Yes.
your service providers that you're using internationally, they're going to know what country protocols are. And like I said, some countries require immediate notification to ATC that you've got a sick person on board. So
that's an excellent point.
And different states may be changing their protocols day to day. So that's something that is going to take a lot of communication and as we proceed forward.
And as it relates, I would imagine, especially internationally with handlers and FBOs. Next question, and then I really want to get to the audience, but what would you consider an acceptable level of risk, Keith?
Once again, thanks for the easy question. I think it is really going to depend on the individual flight operations and what they want to do. I think there's going to have to be a reasonable balance of operational procedures and restrictions balanced with, the safety protocols. Bottom line is we can't mitigate to 100% risk-free. So the fact that we're going to all go back to work and go back to work hopefully sooner than later, there's going to have to be a certain level of risk that we're willing to take. Wearing masks as much as possible is not a bad thing. Some flight operations have already been doing it, and so far it seems like it's not an operational limitation as far as operating the radios and ATC and hearing each other inside the cockpit and stuff like that. But once again, what level of risk are you willing to take? So
great. And we know the masks are definitely going to be a part of our future, so that is an important point.
Yeah, and I can't say what an acceptable level, because some people are really concerned, and one of the things that they talk about is different demographics have a higher risk factor to the virus. So older crew members may have a higher risk just because of physiological conditions than a younger crew member. So once again, that's something that needs to be discussed and figured out within the flight operations and how conservative they want to go with it.
And as it relates to the C-suite and executive level. Mark, let's go over to the audience questions so that we were able to capture quite a few questions. Keith?
Yeah, a couple of different people have asked about, what if a passenger gets sick on a trip? Are companies planning on bringing them back to home base, or what's being sorted out there?
Well, once again, a lot of these guidelines and protocols that we've talked about today are a good starting point for the discussions that need to happen. That's going to be a individual operator decision, and it's also going to depend on the situation at that time. And like I said, get your medical provider involved to see how serious. If it definitely looks like a possible case of coronavirus, they may send you to one of the CDC quarantine centers, and you might not even have a lot of options. But it's very hard to just give an outright answer. There's so many variables, and especially that will play into each individual situation. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't give a better suggestion, but once again, we're looking at what is the lowest acceptable risk. Some flight operations may say, hey, if we have a sick person, we're just going to go to a quarantine section. Other flight operators may be little less conservative and say, nope, we're going to continue home unless ordered or something like that. So once again, that's something that needs to be talked about within the crew members and how they're going to handle it.
I can imagine some of it's going to be a little bit based on the circumstances too. You know, how sick,
Yeah.
what's his history, you know, from some of the other information you might be able to gather at the time of the event.
Yeah, you know, and there's a lot of ideas that are being thrown around just outside as far as the health organizations. You know, one of the things that has come up is saying that when you come into work, take your temperature before you're allowed in the building. And some people have said, okay, maybe we should screen our passengers and take their temperature as they're coming up the stairs. I don't know that I would want to tell one of our upper level executives, stop, I got to take your temperature. You know, so some suggestions from health officials when you start applying them to aviation may not really be practical. So we're going to have individual discussions within our operations on how we want to handle it with our own executives and passengers and stuff like that, and even back and forth between our crew members.
Mhm.
Keith, somebody asked about masks in the cockpit, and I think you already addressed some of this, but the specific question is, with respect to masks in the cockpit, are there studies that you know of or any feedback regarding any interference with the effectiveness of intra-cockpit and ATC communications? I think you said that's been pretty successful.
Yeah, I've spoken to different crews that have had some limited flights over the past week and month and stuff. And a lot of the crews have elected to use masks. And to my surprise, because I was a little skeptical myself about, you know, how much interference, or when you're talking about a pressurization problem, we've never trained to take off a mask and put the oxygen mask on and stuff like that. But from what I've heard from most of the crews that have been using masks in the cockpit, there was very little uncomfortableness, very little interference, if any, talking back and forth within the cockpit and even with ATC. I thought maybe it would be a higher level of muffledness talking to each other and to ATC, but so far there's been no negative feedback towards that, which I was quite surprised about. But that's also a good thing to hear as far as feedback from flight crews that have used it already. I don't know of any studies that have been conducted, but that's just direct feedback from different flight crews.
Comment that this issue is a great exercise for checking the health and effectiveness of an internal SMS. Could we expect from all service providers to perform safety assessment and produce recovery plan prior to continuing with operations? What do you think?
Well, I would hope so. You know, the SMS policy, and when you look at the 4 pillars and stuff like that, that can be applied in almost any industry. And
That's right.
I would hope that, you know, the FBOs and your OEMs and everybody that we deal with would be looking at it kind of from an SMS approach. Once again, we can't regulate, and we don't always have control of things outside our organization and stuff like that. But the whole concept of SMS is looking at a hazard, figuring out what is the level of risk, what mitigation can be applied to decrease the risk to whatever acceptable level your flight operation is going to be comfortable with, and then assessing the risk afterwards. And that's where change management can come into. We may need to start looking, some operations will look at the risk quarterly or annually or something like this. Right now, under these conditions, we might need to start looking at our risk assessment and figuring out the effectiveness maybe on a monthly basis. Are we having crews that are coming back after flights getting sick and needing quarantine and stuff like that? And do we need to increase mitigation procedures or decrease them? Are they inhibiting our operational procedures and not really giving us benefit of a decreased risk. Those are all things that are going to have to be evaluated, and you can apply management changes throughout this whole process.
Okay, good. Another question, maybe this is one of the last questions we'll cover since we're drawing up on the end of the hour. Keith, has there been any protocols developed for aircraft handover from certifying engineer to the operating pilot of the aircraft?
Like in reference to a delivery of a new aircraft or something like that? Is that what they're talking about?
I don't know. We could open a mic and ask our participant to explain it more. How would you like to do that?
We need a new guinea pig. Yeah, let's see how it works.
Okay. Let's try this. This comes from Rustam. Let me find it. I'm going to unmute his mic. Rustam, can you explain your question a little bit more?
Hey, Rustam. He might have his mic muted.
Well, we were giving it a go. We were giving it a try. Maybe he gave up on his question and wasn't able to continue with us.
We'll approach this. We can look at it from two aspects: either a new aircraft delivery from an OEM, or if we're doing a crew swap on a long range flight where you're changing over crews and stuff like that. Those discussions and questions have been brought up. Once again, high sterilization and cleaning procedures would be recommended. If you're looking at it from a delivery from an OEM or a sales rep, have a conversation with them about maybe some cleaning protocols you want established on the delivery. You know, there's different things that you can talk about prior to even receiving the aircraft. And then you could even bring in third-party cleaners when the aircraft arrives at your hangar, allow the incoming crew to get off, let the cleaners get on, sanitize it with some of these different products that they've really come up with to help. If you're doing a crew swap, going to Asia and you're in Anchorage, you're going to have to figure out what protocols as a company you're going to want to do. Maybe allow the flight crew coming off to fully get off before you go on, and when you get on, before you touch anything, take 10-15 minutes, wipe the cockpit down, wipe the galley down, you know, sanitize some different areas that you know are common areas. Bottom line is, in the cockpit, there's certain buttons and controls that both crew members touch from time to time, you know. So once again, these are all topics that individual flight operations are going to need to talk about and figure out what they want to do and what their comfort level is. But in regards to having an aircraft delivered, I would talk to your OEM about what procedures you want to take on the delivery.
And Keith, as we close out this session, there was just some information that came in that might be helpful to the audience in regards to protocols for masks. So this is, you know, new territory for everybody, but you want to be sure, A, that your masks are not coming from an unreliable resource, and that may be something that we think is all common sense, but it's tricky. There's a lot of false advertising, and beware of masks that come from outside of the US. There's also a division called NIOSH, which is an approved particulate filtering respirator. They basically rate masks. That won't give you the end all be all, but at least will give you a resource. And lastly, I would think that perhaps this whole discussion could be put into a further working group study. If the collective roundtables would be interested in working together and submitting their concepts, ideas, and protocols, perhaps this is an article that the Flight Safety Foundation could host in our publications. So With that, we'll go ahead and thank you very much for your presentation today. Informative and something for us to work forward in the future. Mark, I'll hand it back to you for closing out this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Keith. And just one other feedback, somebody really commented on how they like this and they want this presentation and posted within the next 24 hours. So we will do our best to get that out there.
That's great. And I want to thank, I spoke to a lot of people from a lot of different flight departments. These aren't my ideas. This is a conglomeration of a lot of ideas and possible protocol suggestions that have come from other people a lot smarter than myself.
Cool. Well, we love to have the long list of considerations. That's very much what we did when we helped to put together the whole pandemic roadmap. There's things that need to be thought about now that, you know, just was never part of our business. So you've helped us with another new list. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, can I invite Hassan back? We can't hear you yet, Hassan, so we'll ask for help to get your mic open.
Does that ever happen to you with the mute mic?
Yes.
No, okay. I was going to just ask Lisa to maybe jump back in if she is available. As we finish up this session. Hello, Lisa. I just wanted to just observe. Wow, that was fabulous. I think very informative from Keith. And I imagine that there's a lot of demand for that type of information moving forward. So yeah, it was well done, and thank you. And we'll be seeing you later on in the afternoon.
Perfect.
Okay, so long for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Very
All
good.
right. Well, there are people that we have to thank today, and they have really helped us out. Air Care International, Gulfstream, Quality Resources LLC, Advanced Aircrew Academy, and Polaris Aero have been sponsors for both days at this BAS event. We are very appreciative of those sponsors. And of course, as we've said, this is being done in partnership with the NBAA. So with that, we want to remind you, we still have one session left. We've focused a lot about safety issues in and around the COVID crisis, but this afternoon, we're going to extend our look beyond the crisis. What's going on with some of the automation confusion issues? Well, the FAA is going to help us in terms of looking at flight path management. And we've got a crew of people in a panel this afternoon that will be talking more about some of the safety data information that can be used from different sources, both from safety reporting and from flight data monitoring and focal programs. So I'm sure that'll be a hit, and we look forward to having you with us. If you haven't registered for that one, the website for that is right there, flightsafety.org/events. And it was great to have you with us. We'll see you this afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern.
So long.